Hey everyone, this is Pete, and welcome back to Atari ST A to Z, a series of short playthroughs of Atari ST games, some which I grew up with and some which are new to me. Today is one of the former. Today we're looking at Flight Simulator 2, which was a 1987 release from Sublogic, developed by Bruce Artwick, Matt Toshlog and Mike Koulas. It's the sequel to a title originally released for Apple II and TRS-80 that's come to be known as FS1 Flight Simulator, which allowed players to fly a simulated Sopwith Camel. Flight Simulator 2 has had several notably different releases over the years. The Atari 8-bit version saw you flying a Piper Cherokee aircraft, for example, while the Atari ST version we're concerned with today offers you the choice between a Cessna 152 and a Learjet. The different releases also focused on different geographical areas. While the 8-bit version focused on Chicago, the ST version starts you in San Francisco and Oakland. Both versions had the ability to load additional scenery from floppy disk though, and this side of things really came into its own with the Atari ST version, as the Atari 8-bit version found itself lacking a number of scenery disk releases that other platforms had enjoyed up until that point. Flight Simulator 2 is notable for being one of the first civilian flight simulators released, and for its strong emphasis on realism rather than arcade-style accessibility. The aim was to create an experience that was as akin to flying a real plane as you could get on home computers at the time, and that meant that this was a simulator you'd have to learn. The original Atari 8-bit version of this game and the subsequent ST release are what got my father into writing for Page 6 magazine, later known as New Atari User, which in turn saw both my brother and I taking an interest in writing about games too, and if you know either of us, you know where that got us as well. My father still insists to this day that Flight Simulator 2 is not a game, and to be honest, despite us teasing him about this all over the years, I've always agreed with him that it's a very distinct sort of experience that stands out from other things you can do with on your computer. Now, as it happens, I've actually got the issue of Page 6 magazine where my dad talks about Flight Simulator 2. So let's just take a moment to have a look at what he had to say about it. So there was a full double-page spread. Sorry, just batting the microphone there. A full double-page spread on the Atari ST version here, which was a couple of issues after the Atari 8-bit version, which was the first article on the subject that my dad had written about Flight Simulator. So let's pick out a few things that he found noteworthy about this ST version. So here we are, here's a bit about the superior graphics. Looking through the windscreen, you can immediately see a difference from the 8-bit version. The scenery graphics in the San Francisco area are far more sophisticated than those in the 8-bit version. For instance, items such as runway markings are colour-filled shapes, not single lines or wireframes, and there are more buildings to be seen. This only applies to the new area though, the others seem to have been transferred from the 8-bit with very little change. So yeah, each version of Flight Simulator was basically packaged with a certain amount of scenery that you could explore, and then you could expand that with scenery disks if you wanted to, but there was some very basic default scenery that was scattered around the world as well. What else have we got to say? Oh, here we are. This was good. A major addition to the ST version is the ability to view your aircraft from the outside, in capitals. That's right, you can now see how your aircraft looks as you fly it. Microprose's solo flight has been doing it for years, you say? Not like this, it hasn't. You have the choice of two different vantage points, either from a spotter plane flying near you or from a control tower on the ground. Yeah, so external views in flight simulators were still quite new at this point. So that obviously struck my dad quite deeply. What else have we got? Oh yeah, here we are. He was very taken with the track function in these external views. So the view you get now is if the control tower has taken wing and is streaking after you at very low altitude and tremendous speed. You rush through the landscape, whizzing past buildings, over water, under bridges, whatever, until it's repositioned at the distance away from your aircraft originally requested. The effect is startling, incredible, fantastic, exciting. I'm running out of suitable adjectives. All the time your aircraft position is kept in view on screen, marked with a small dot. The dot slowly grows in size until it becomes the familiar shape of your aircraft once again. The effect can really be quite breathtaking. Yeah, so it's it's really interesting sort of how deeply this struck my dad at the time, and it, as a long-time aviation enthusiast, he found Flight Simulator 2 to be exactly what he wanted from a computer flight simulator. It made him feel like he was flying a real aircraft. So we'll just leave with his few conclusions. here we are. I could go on writing about this forever. By now you must have gathered that it's a program not to be missed by any ST owner. If you have an ST, you must, repeat, must add this program to your software collection. It's the finest piece of simulation, educational, entertainment software I've ever seen on a home computer, and worth every penny of the £50 asking price. And, you know, I'd agree with that. Flight Simulator 2 on Atari ST was an astonishing achievement. It was incredibly well supported by Sublogic with lots of different scenery discs. There were lots of books written about it. There were lots of sort of unofficial expansions, and it was sort of the real start of what would become the worldwide phenomenon that has become Flight Simulator over the years, or indeed Microsoft Flight Simulator, because of course the Flight Simulator series is still going strong today. Later installments of Flight Simulator from version 3 onwards, I believe, were released by Microsoft, with the most recent installment in the series for Windows 10 PCs happily melting graphics cards even on its ultra settings right now. But that is now, and this is then, so let's go play Flight Simulator 2. Okay, welcome to Flight Simulator 2, my dad's favourite not game for Atari ST. And here we are on runway 27R of Oakland Airport. In Oakland, California. We are in a Cessna 152, and from here we can fiddle around with a bunch of things using these menus up at the top. So we've got an info panel here. Oh, I beg your pardon, it's a Cessna 182, not a Cessna 152. 152 must be in another version of Flight Simulator. But yeah, from here you can pick to fly the Learjet if you prefer. You can find out a bit of information about this version of Flight Simulator 2 itself. You can choose different ways to play. You can watch a demo mode, a quiet demo, which is demo without sound effects. Jet mode will pre-configure you with the Learjet. World War I Ace is a sort of game mode that you can play that's not very fun, to be honest, but it is there. And multiplayer, which you can play over a null modem cable. View here. We can choose between different ways of looking at the aircraft, such as the ones that my dad got so excited about in the article that he wrote. You can even have two 3D windows open at the same time if you want to, and have different views in them at the same time. So if I want to have one looking from the tower and the other one looking from the front of the aircraft, I can do that. So we'll go back to the cockpit and just close this one for now. Okay, so if you've ever played a Flight Simulator game before, this will probably be very familiar. This cockpit layout in particular remained the standard for Flight Simulator in its numerous releases right up until sort of Flight Simulator 5 and 95 and 98 and so, when we started to get unique cockpits for the different aircraft. But right from sort of the first releases of Flight Simulator 2 on 8-bit platforms, this sort of Cessna-inspired layout, which conveniently was very similar to the Piper Cherokee layout, it was the standard. And the reason for that is that it's very clear and easy to read, it's easy to understand. It tells you all the information you need to fly, while having some helpful additional information for those who want to take their simulation experience a little bit further with things like navigation aids and so on. Now, we're not going to do anything particularly complicated today, largely because I can't remember a lot of things, how to use the navigation aids and so on. But I can, but I don't have the details on it. I don't have the sort of the frequencies and things I need to tune the radios to. So we're just going to go for a little fly around, see what we can see, maybe land somewhere if I feel up to it. But for now, let's throttle up and be on the way. So you can control this in several different ways. You can use the mouse as your yoke if you want to, and that gives you fairly precise control, but for some people it's a little bit too precise and easy to knock out of whack. So a lot of people would just play Flight Simulator 2 on the ST with the keyboard, where most of your main flight functions are controlled by the numeric keypad. So throttle, for example, is controlled by the 9 and 3 keys on the numeric keypad. Elevator up and elevator down are controlled by 8 and 2 on the keypad, and banking left and right, which is by default linked to your rudders to help with turning, is connected to 4 and 6 on the keypad. here we are, gaining some altitude over Oakland. Presently 500 feet up. I'll level out when we come to about 1,000 feet or so. Just ease off the throttle a bit to bring the nose down. That's one of the things that Flight Simulator will teach you, is that controlling your altitude and your rate of descent and ascent is as much about controlling the speed of your engine as it is just pointing the nose up and down. And that's just one of many ways that this is a very realistic approach to simulated flight, and a big contrast to everything else that was around at the time, because the majority of flight simulators that were around at this time were military flight simulators that didn't necessarily put a strong emphasis on realism. They tended to focus on very modern aircraft with fly-by-wire systems and so on, so there was a very immediate response on the joystick. So you could sort of really whip those things around the sky in ways that I guess a real one probably could. But I remember trying this for the first time, sort of guided by my dad, who has experience in sort of real flight and things like gliders and so on, and also with the principles of real flight through flight simulators and the like, and sort of being struck by how sort of delicate and nuanced you needed to be. So just things like holding the plane level is oddly challenging if you've not tried it before. But that's what made this unique, that's what made it interesting, because while there had been a couple of civilian flight simulators around, the one that my dad mentioned in his article, Microprose's Solo Flight, was one example. There hadn't been anything that had been quite as realistic as this in terms of how the plane handled and how it responded to your inputs, and the subtle effects that just the slightest tweak on the controls would have. You may notice a slight freeze there. That is while the disk was accessing to load some scenery in, and you will have seen some stuff pop into view. So those familiar with the Oakland area will doubtless have determined that we are presently approaching Bay Bridge. As sort of warning, by the way, that is the outer marker for the airport that we're passing by on our right hand side. So that's used if you're flying on instruments to give you an idea that you're getting close to your destination. And so if we head over in this direction, we're going towards San Francisco. Now, obviously the level of detail here might look a little bit laughable by modern standards, but back at this point, this was revolutionary, because there were real landmarks, there were real road systems, there were things like those 3D bridges. It was really quite remarkable to be able to virtually visit a real place in a virtual aircraft like this. And you can see the harbours down there in the grey. The think that's Alcatraz over there on the right. And then off in the distance, you should be able to see Golden Gate Bridge. Let's bring it down a little bit and go and have a look at Alcatraz if we can. I believe that's Alcatraz anyway. My brother lives in the San Francisco area, but not actually in San Francisco itself, so the city itself I don't know super well. But it is an area that I have a certain amount of personal interest in, shall we say. I can't see much on Alcatraz from here, or whatever that island is. And let's head over here towards the Golden Gate. The reason Oakland and San Francisco is a nice place to sort of start your flight simulator adventures is because it's on the bay like this, because it's pretty much at sea level. That means that you can rely on your altimeter to tell you how high you are. If you're in sort of areas of higher ground, then you have to know what ground level is, because the altimeter tells you your altitude above sea level. So fortunately around here, ground level is almost the same as sea level, so when your altimeter says 0, you know you're close to the ground. Or indeed on the ground. Right, so while we're flying around we can play with some of these views. So we've got this view direction option here where we can look around using various keys, so we can take a look out the back. In fact, if we pull the nose up as we're doing that, there we are. You see the bridge disappearing behind us. And look out the left side and the right side, and back to the front again. And then you got these views that my dad was getting excited about. So the spotter view, for example, we press S for spot. There we are. This is a view as if from a plane that is flying in formation with yours. So you turn, it turns. But you'll notice all the instruments at the bottom of the screen are still as if you're in the cockpit, so you can actually fly from this view by paying attention to things like the artificial horizon and the climb and descent indicator and the altimeter and so on. This is the track view. My dad was talking about the tower swooping through the scenery at high speed, at ground level, and eventually getting to a point where we can see our aircraft. So I believe with the spot plane as well, you can also set spot plane to choose where you want the spot plane to be looking at from, and how it kind of transitions from place to place as well. There we are, you can get a nice flyby of your plane. View it from above. Choose how far away it is. So if we want to view our plane from the front, for example, and go for this one, And we'll just decrease the distance from it. There we are. Nice close-up front view of what our plane is up to. And like I said before, you've got that additional 3D view if you want it. So you can actually be flying the plane from cockpit view and look at your plane from the spotter view at the same time if you want to. So just go to second 3D like this. And you go to spot plane. Oops. No, you don't. You go to set spot plane. Set it to the second 3D window. Something like that anyway. I've forgotten the exact key controls. But yeah, you can have two 3D views at once. And it doesn't have a massively discernibly negative effect on the frame rate either, which is quite nice. Now, polygonal 3D graphics is actually one of the things that the ST was very good at. So while we all know how good the Amiga was for throwing 2D graphics around and doing lovely smooth scrolling and all that sort of thing, the ST tended to have the edge when it came to 3D graphics like this. And that's why for many people the platform of preference for packages like Flight Simulator 2 was the ST. Mouse cursor out the way. It's just been lurking there for ages, I do apologise. Right, we need to find somewhere to land. I mean, we could just try and go back where we came from. But that would have involved navigating by sight. But I mean, it's possible. That was the remarkable thing about this. Although the ground detail is relatively limited, there's enough there for you to be able to navigate by what pilots refer to as visual flight rules. They're being able to navigate just by what you can see out the window. So from what I can see right now, I can tell a bunch of things. I can tell where I am in relation to the main city of San Francisco, which is over there on the right. I can see Golden Gate Bridge over on the left. And just about see Bay Bridge off in the distance. And using that information, we should be able to find our way back to Oakland. But I'm not promising a good landing. We shall see. We shall see. Just lean over towards the city, see if we can get a nice close view of it as we pass over. But yeah, I've got some fond memories of this. like I say, my dad really liked it, so it was something that the rest of our family would get involved with him doing, because he was interested in exploring this and its possibilities and all the various scenery discs and books that came out about it. We had, I think, most of the scenery discs that were available for the ST version. We also had a bunch of books. There was an author my dad liked very much called Charles Gulick, and he did some really cool books called Flight Simulator Adventures. And what he did with those was he'd give you a set of parameters to put into the simulator. So sort of starting position, aircraft, what condition you're playing with in as well, because this can simulate sort of aircraft failures and stuff as well. And you'd input all that information, and then you'd follow the instructions in the book as if Charles Gulick was talking you through a flight. And these adventures ranged from the mundane to the absolutely ridiculous. So there were things that were like sort of simple training flights. There's Oakland over there. There were sort of simple training flights, but then there were things like you're delivering emergency medical supplies to a little girl who needs them. I think I'm a bit high. Let's see if we can't do something about that. Yeah, much too high to land on that one. Okay, let's go round and see if we can land back on runway 27 where we started. So that means we'll need to fly out in this direction for a bit. Trying to bring the altitude down a bit as we go. So we can keep an eye on our position in relation to the runway by using the ability to look around. So sort of going roughly in parallel at the moment. We've got a slight descent going on, which is good. The speed's coming down as well. What, I might actually be able to do this. Now watch me plummet into the sea. I know that's what you're all holding out for. We want to get a fair distance away from the airfield so we've got space to turn around. And also to line ourselves up with the runway. If we're too far in one direction or the other. Alright, let's try that. sure we're not losing too much height while we're turning, because we do want to lose some height, because we're still 1,000 feet up. Good time for a loading brake. So we want to get back on the heading 270. Oh, actually, no we don't. That's much too far, isn't it? I think this is a different runway, isn't it? Runway 270 is the one that's going across. Anyway, doesn't matter. Let's just do what we can to get ourselves in a good position for landing on whatever this runway is. If you're wondering what that T shape in the middle of the windshield is, that's the center point of your windshield. So that helps you to do things like line up when you're doing exactly what we're doing here. So you line that up with the center of the runway. And assuming in the right position, we just want to be a little bit to the left. Let's get the undercarriage down. And you'll notice the nose dropping while we do that, as well as the speed coming down quite a bit. We're still a bit high, unfortunately. So this is not going to be a very clean landing, but it should be a reasonably safe one. Add some flaps there to help further reduce the speed and give us a bit of lift. Much too high. This is a messy landing. I do apologise. And flare. Messy, but we're down and safe, just about. Now, if I could only remember what the key for brakes was. I think we're naturally going to come to a stop anyway. Anyway. That is Flight Simulator 2 for Atari ST. As you can see, if you spent any time with the most recent Flight Simulator, you'll see that fundamentally the product hasn't changed all that much over the years. It just looks nicer. But yeah, we were doing this sort of thing right back then in 16-bit with filled colour polygonal graphics, and loving it. So yeah, this is a long-running series with good reason, a very strongly beloved series, and a series that is very important to our whole family as well. So yeah, it's been fun to revisit that. As someone who enjoys the most recent release of Flight Simulator, this has really fond memories for me as well. So, like I say, A lot of fun to revisit. And if you're interested in the history of the series as well, I recommend checking it out. Both this version and the Atari 8-bit version in particular. The 8-bit version is a technical marvel when you think about the hardware that it's running on. But yeah, well worth your time. Well worth your time. For now though, I'll just say, as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.